The evening meetings, I want to talk about Ellen White, and tonight I want to share a few of her experiences. When Stephen was just before he was stoned, he said these words to the Jewish leaders, found in Acts 7, verses 51 and 52. Said, "Ye stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, ye do always resist the Holy Ghost, as your fathers did, so do ye." No wonder he got stoned. Those are pretty straight words. But then he comes to this point. What's his evidence for what he said? Which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? And they have slain them which showed before of the coming of the just one, of whom ye have been now the betrayers and murderers. So he quickly traces the history of prophets in Israel. And he says, can you name one prophet that wasn't persecuted? And they could not name even one. Some met a very untimely fate, like Isaiah, who was put in a hollow log and sawn in half because they were fed up with the messages that God was giving through him. We have Jeremiah, and he's thrown in a pit, and in general, frustrated because people made fun of his message and didn't want to listen. And so the question has to arise, I wonder if anything like that happened to Ellen White. Here's another text from the Old Testament, 2 Chronicles 36, verses 15 and 16. The Lord God of their fathers sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending, because he had compassion on his people. Here we see why God raises up prophets. He does not want to see his people destroyed. And so he tries to help them. But it says, they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misused his prophets until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people till there was no remedy. So we see both in the Old and New Testament that prophets do not get treated well. Now, of course, there are always some people that really appreciate the prophet, but it's not the majority, and the prophets go through a lot of suffering. When I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist, I sort of had the idea that Ellen White never got persecuted, that, the Adventist church listened to her, and so on. But as I studied, I became aware that's not true. Now, she wasn't sawn in half, although maybe some people would have liked to have done that, but she did suffer. Here from Life Sketches, page 222, it was a great cross for me to relate to individuals what had been shown me concerning their wrongs. It caused me great distress to see others troubled or grieved. So here we have a prophet that is tender-hearted. She does not like to hurt people's feelings, and yet she has been given the responsibility to point out their sins. None of us like that very well. If somebody comes, if they do it nicely, we may just boil inside. But if they don't do it nicely, it boils out from the inside. And so here she had been given that responsibility, and she saw how it seemed to hurt them, and it really grieved her. And when obliged to declare the messages, I often softened them down and related them as favorably for the individual as I could, and then would go by myself and weep in agony of spirit. Now there's people around that enjoy telling people what's wrong with them, and they don't go and weep after they tell us. They think they've done their duty. But this was not Ellen White's approach to telling people what needed to be changed. And she didn't go because she thought they ought to change. She went because God revealed to her that they need to change. And yet, after she had delivered the message, she said, I went and I wept in agony of spirit. I looked upon those who had only their own souls to care for and thought, if I were in their condition, I would not murmur. She would be praising God that all she had to worry about was herself, and yet God had laid upon her the responsibility of guiding those, whether they wanted to be guided or not, and some appreciated what was shared, but even if they didn't appreciate it, that God had called her to that ministry, and she had to suffer the pain of going through that. It was hard to relate the plain, cutting testimonies given me of God. I anxiously watched the result, and if the individual reproved, rose up against the reproof, and afterwards opposed the truth, these queries would arise in my mind. Did I deliver the message just as I should? Oh God, could there not have been some way to save them? And then such distress hung upon my soul that I often felt death would be a welcome messenger, and the grave a sweet resting place. This, I think, is important to understand what a prophet goes through, and other prophets went through similar things when they had to deliver messages to individuals. And of course, we have a history in this church of various individuals getting mad, going out of the church, blaming Ellen White, and so on for it. There's a long list of them. We won't go through them now, but some of them, before they were rebuked, they preached the value of Sister White's writings with vigor, and then when they got the letter or the interview that revealed their sins, they changed their mind and they said, she's a problem. And they went out and preached against Ellen White and her messages. So it's a serious thing. Now, today, we don't have a living prophet, and so it makes it a lot easier for us to mistreat the prophet. And there's a variety of ways that we can mistreat the prophet. If we go around saying that what she said is no longer in effect, that was for her day, but it's not for today. If we go around saying that, we're going to turn some people against at least part of her writings, and we might turn them against all of her writings. Not only that, but we won't benefit from that part of it, and let's suppose our name was on it. and we would not accept it, then we are going to be, if she was alive, we are going to be bringing the same pain to her heart that we just read about. And of course, God's heart, He's the real one that has the pain for every time that He tries to help us and we don't want to listen and we rise up against it. I try to get people, wherever I am talking about Ellen White, that instead of complaining when something steps on our toes, we need to go to God in prayer. And we need to ask Him to help us be able to accept this. We should know that it's absolutely true. The only thing we don't know, it doesn't have our name on it, so the only way we're going to know it belongs to us is if we pray and ask the Lord to reveal, does it belong to us? Occasionally, we may realize, yeah, that fits me. You know, every once in a while, as I'm reading, I come across something and I think, wow, that's exactly what I need to hear. But other times, we don't make the connection, so we have to pray. And if it is for us specifically, He will make it plain. He loves to help people that want to know about their faults. And I don't believe we have much longer to get rid of our faults. The time is running out. And if we're not willing to conquer now, when will we have the time to conquer? So really, the best thing God can do for us is to reveal something that needs to be changed so that we can work on it and seek to, by God's grace, conquer it. I did not realize that I was unfaithful in thus questioning and doubting, and did not see the danger and sin of such a course until, in vision, I was taken into the presence of Jesus. He looked upon me with a frown and turned His face from me. It is not possible to describe the terror and agony that I felt. I fell upon my face before Him, but had no power to utter a word. Oh, how I longed to be covered and hid from that dreadful frown. Then could I realize, in some degree, what the feelings of the lost will be when they cry, "Mountains and rocks fall on us, and hide us from the face of Him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb." Now that experience that she went through, don't you think we could apply that to those of us if we reject what has been said to correct us and help us? I think so, because he wasn't just sad because she didn't deliver the full message, but God is also sad when we don't accept the full message or don't accept it at all. Presently, an angel bade me rise, and the sight that met my eyes can hardly be described. A company was presented before me, whose hair and garments were torn, and whose countenances were the very picture of despair and horror. They came close to me and took their garments and rubbed them on mine. I looked at my garments and saw that they were stained with blood. Again I fell like one dead at the feet of my accompanying angel. I could not plead one excuse and longed to be away from such a holy place. You know, that's really the issue when we put it all together, Those that live a life of sin feel very uncomfortable in the presence of God. And really it's His mercy that destroys them so that they don't have to, throughout the ceaseless ages, be in pain. But for us that want to be there, He tries to clean us up. And He tries to show what's wrong with us still, so that we can get it corrected and thus be able to enjoy being in His presence. Well, in this case, Ellen White, I don't know that it's called a sin per se, but it certainly was a serious matter for her to fail to pass on the message exactly as it was delivered. Again, the angel raised me up on my feet and said, "This is not your case now, but this scene has passed before you to let you know what your situation must be if you neglect to declare to others what the Lord has revealed to you." So she's being given the chance to change her way of delivering the message and to worry less. Now, I doubt that the pain was any less, but to worry less, and which caused her to water it down and not present it as clearly as it needed to be. But if you are faithful to the end, you shall eat of the tree of life and shall drink of the river of the water of life. You will have to suffer much. So God tells her, close to the beginning of her ministry, you will have to suffer much. Ever since Ellen White, there have been people who thought they were prophets. Most of them are women. But we had Ernie Knoll there, and there's probably other men. And so they don't understand this. If someone's a prophet, they're going to suffer much. I think a lot less people would choose to be a prophet if they understood what a prophet's work is all about. You will have to suffer much, but the grace of God is sufficient. I then felt willing to do all that the Lord might require me to do, that I might have His approbation and not feel His dreadful frown. So the Lord helped her to be able to come to the point where she would not water down the messages and would say it like it should be said. Now the Bible is very clear on this point. In Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 18 and 19. And even though we are not prophets, we still have some responsibility in helping our brothers and sisters who are going in a wrong path. And in Ezekiel it says, "When I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not warning, nor speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way, to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand." So here we see the responsibility that God has laid upon all, but in a very special sense upon the prophet. Because the prophet has more accurate information as to what they need to share with people. "Yet, if thou warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul." Recently, some things have happened that have stirred my heart, and I have felt that I need to say something about it. Not to other people, but to the people involved. And so, I wrote one email not long before coming here to someone that I felt preached a sermon that was very seriously off, and I sent a letter in love to him, and so far he's accepted it as a loving attempt, and we're supposed to get together sometime and talk about it. But, it's so easy, and most people want to just, they see the wrong, but they don't want to do anything about it. But you notice what the text says, then the blood is on us. But if we warn and they don't listen, then the blood is on them. And that's very important, I think, especially in the life of Ellen White. She had to be very careful. In Review and Herald of November 25, 1884, she's speaking about her own experience. I once passed a night of anguish at the thought that I must go out and relate to others the things that God had presented before me. I shrank from this work in timidity and fear. The cross seemed so heavy that it would crush me. How clearly I remembered the experience of 40 years ago when my light went out in darkness because I was unwilling to lift this cross and refused to be obedient. So we've now traveled down 40 years. Ellen White has had an experience that reminds her of what had happened 40 years before, and it reinforces her realization, I need to be faithful whether people accept it or whether they don't. Early Writings, page 76. I am aware of the unbelief that exists in the minds of the multitude relative to visions. Also, that many who profess to be looking for Christ and teach that we are in the last days call them all of Satan. So they're, the people out in the world, we expect opposition from them. But Seventh-day Adventists were calling her visions of Satan. Probably not all of them, but at least some of them. I expect much opposition from such, and had I not felt that the Lord required it of me, I should not have made my views thus public, as they will probably call forth the hatred and derision of some, but I fear God more than man. And that continues to call forth the hatred of some and the derision of others and the explaining away of many of these things. And so the prophet is still being mistreated by the majority, I'm afraid to say. The majority of people are mistreating the prophet still today in a variety of ways. This is from Life Sketches, page 266 and 7. I was taken off in vision and again shown the case of this woman. She was represented to me as being in perfect darkness. Jesus frowned upon her and her husband. That withering frown caused me to tremble. I saw that she had acted the hypocrite, professing holiness, while her heart was full of corruption. So here we see someone posing as a better than average Seventh-day Adventist, but the truth of her case is she's in perfect darkness. After I came out of vision, I related with trembling, yet with faithfulness, what I had seen. You know, some people probably are thankful that they are not living when the prophet is alive, because the prophet is shown things that happen behind closed doors and in secret sometimes, shown what's going on and revealed that to the prophet to try to help the person. I was severely tried and anxious for the people of God. Would those present believe the testimony? So now we have a church, and most of the church thinks she's a very righteous lady, and yet she's in perfect darkness, and God reveals that to Ellen White. The woman put on a calm appearance and said, I am glad the Lord knows my heart. He knows that I love him. So she was really good at covering it over. Some people would get mad and, publicly attack Ellen White, but this woman, she took it very peacefully and just declared her connection with God. Then her husband rose in anger and, laying his hand on the Bible, said, the Bible is all we want. I shall not give up the Bible for visions. There's an attitude that is repeated over and over again, that we don't need her writings, we just need the Bible. Whenever somebody says that, you can be aware that there's a problem, because we cannot accept the Bible and reject the last prophet. It's just not possible. We have to accept all the prophets or none of the prophets. But he was different from his wife in that he was really angry. His wife affected to check him, saying, don't, husband dear, don't talk. The Lord knows me and will take care of it all. Then she vindicated herself, saying, if my heart could only be opened that you might see it. What she didn't know is that her heart had already been seen by the prophet. I knew the minds of some were unsettled, whether to believe what the Lord had shown me or let her appearance weigh against the testimony borne. Her appearance was perfectly calculated to gain their sympathy. Now, if you'd been in the audience and you heard Ellen White speak out about this woman, what would have been your diagnosis? Would you have said, Ellen White's a prophet, she's got to be right? Or would doubts have come in your mind to where you would say, boy, she sure is hard on that poor woman. There's inside of all of us a desire to fight for the underdog. And that probably happened in that audience. And they thought, my, Sister White is terrible for what she's doing, embarrassing this woman in public. And so on another occasion where Ellen White was shown some, sins of people, she said those in front of the audience, and people told her, well, you did wrong. You're supposed to go privately and tell them and not be telling it in public. So people were always wanting to correct Ellen White and tell her how she should do her work. But you see, God was telling her when and where to give it. And her answer was, well, the sin was not a private sin. In fact, a lot of the church members knew about that sin, and so it wasn't wrong to share that sin in front of the church because the person was deceiving the church by claiming to be righteous and they were not righteous. And so there are times when that apparently is appropriate. See where I left off. Yeah. I knew the minds of some were unsettled, whether to believe what the Lord had shown me or let her appearance weigh against the testimony borne. Her appearance was perfectly calculated to gain their sympathy. But I had discharged a painful duty, and God would take care of the result. At the close of the meeting, she stated that she had no hard feelings against me and that she should pray for me, and if I got to heaven, I would see her there. We returned with Brother P's family, and that night the Lord met with us. I believed that the Lord would show his people the truth and justify the vision. The neighbors said that I had abused the poor woman. Not long after this, terrible fear seized upon this woman. A horror rested upon her, and she began to confess. She even went from house to house among her unbelieving neighbors and confessed that the man she had been living with for years was not her husband, that she ran away from England and left a kind husband and one child. She also confessed that she had professed to understand medicine and had taken oath that the bottles of mixture she made cost her $1 when they cost her only 12 cents, that she had taken $30 from a poor man by taking a false oath. So this lady had a lot of sins on her record, and she knew it, but she was professing a different picture. Many such wicked acts she confessed, and her repentance seemed to be genuine. In some cases, she restored where she had taken away wrongfully. In one instance, she started on foot 40 miles to confess. We could see the hand of God in this matter. He gave her no rest, day nor night, until she confessed her sins publicly. This fully justified in the minds of the brethren and those also of their neighbors who sympathized with her for a time what God had shown me of her vileness under the garb of sanctification. So in this case, it ended up for the good. This lady was saved from the pitfall of sin and began to make right what she had done wrong. But it didn't always turn out that way. And many went to their dying day, against Ellen White and feeling that she abused people and that she had abused them in particular. So she knew what it was like to be persecuted. I don't know whether you've ever had any persecution by those that should have been your friends, those that should have been supporting you, and they persecute you in different ways. But now I've never suffered, bodily persecution from our enemies, but I am told that kind of persecution is harder to bear than the other from our enemies. And so I believe that to be true. And so Ellen White suffered on and on for years, many years. She started her work at about 17 years of age, and she closed her work at 85 years of age. And therefore, this is just a little example of some of the things that she had to go through in order to be a faithful prophet. Also, there's another interesting story. This comes from a letter written by C.B. Hughes, and he wrote it to Willie White on July 22, 1912. Toward the end of her life, Willie had to help her quite a bit, and so the letter was written to Willie. But this letter reveals the attitude of people toward Ellen White often. This, by the way, took place in Avondale, which was a college that God impressed Ellen White to get started, and it was supposed to be a school that would train people very similar to what we try to do in self-supporting work. But they didn't always appreciate Ellen White's involvement in the school. Maybe I should give a little background to this statement. On a holiday, C.B. Hughes arranged for some games to be played and to just have a wonderful time with no school and so on. And so the students were really happy and pleased. And the next morning, Ellen White drove over to his house, I think her helper came over to her house and said, Ellen White wants to talk to you about the way you spent yesterday. And that's where this comes in. If Sister White had struck a blow full in my face, I do not think I would have felt so hurt as I did at her words. She talked to me as an old woman who had no sympathy with the needs of the youth. Now this, of course, happened before 1900, so she was getting up in years, but she was still able to work vigorously. To say that I was very indignant hardly expresses the feeling I had. But I had a great deal of respect for Sister White, so notwithstanding the grievous mistake I thought she was making, I replied not a word. Now what he's talking about there is that Ellen White told him, I want to talk to your faculty. And so he didn't want to stop her from that. He agreed, but he thought, boy, she's making a big mistake to try to tell these teachers. When she met the teachers, one of them remarked that if she knew so much about running a school, she would advise her to come over and take charge. Can you imagine telling a prophet that? If you think you know so much about running a school, why don't you become the leader and you run the school the way you want to? Well, those are just two glimpses that I came across. I'm sure there's a lot more that could be found. I don't think Ellen White talked very frequently about the pain that she went through, but the fact that a few of these things are available reveal to us that she, no doubt, had more or less constant pain in delivering the messages that God had given to her. And there was persecution of her in words, not so much physically, but in words, people talking behind her back, people saying unkind things to their friends about her, and on it goes. Now it's our turn. What are we going to do? Are we going to, it's okay to test her and be sure that she's a prophet. There's no harm in that. But once we see that she is a prophet, then we have a responsibility not to throw any of it out. but to allow it to change us, bring us into line with what it says, and not to criticize and say it doesn't mean what it says very plainly. To criticize that and say, no, she didn't mean that, and try to make it say something else. That's persecuting the prophet again. And ultimately Jesus, because, he's the one, when one of his children is mistreated, he takes it personally that he's the one being mistreated. And I don't think they thought about that back then. So I always try to urge us, yes, there are some things that step on our toes, but it's much better to go to God in prayer. Don't criticize it. Don't try to get out from under it and say it doesn't apply. But go to God in prayer and say, please help me. Obviously, the prophet has to be right. I have to be the one in the wrong. And please help me to be able to see value and to practice what we have been told. And I believe that group of people will get fully cleaned up and ready for the close of probation. And also, as Adventists, we have a step before the close of probation, and that is, if we don't receive the early rain, when it's time for the latter rain, we will not be able to receive it. The world can receive it at that time, but we can't. So that means we have an earlier deadline than what the rest of the world has. And that is to listen to all of it, whether in the Bible or the Spirit of Prophecy, and to follow it. And God will help us to do that. If we're on that side, He'll help us to be able to do it.